Sure. I do still consider myself even now a classical liberal, and Don't Burn This Book was my way of laying out all of my classically liberal principles that, as you're sort of implying, in a modern sense, makes you a moderate conservative or a libertarian, and we can always whittle around what those issues are and where the government should be involved or not be involved, or things like that. But yes, I was a Bernie supporting lefty. You can find videos of me 5 or 6 years ago supporting Bernie, believe it or not. There were several reasons for that. One of the things I talk about in the book is that I think if you grow up in an American public education system and getting the American culture, the things that fall within the Overton window of what's acceptable in America, everyone is sort of a default lefty. You have to come to conservatism, you have to come to libertarianism, you have to come to the idea of individual rights and freedom and liberty and all the things that you've been writing about and talking about for so many years. So you sort of, if you just grow up, you're just kind of a lefty. It's sort of like, oh, Democrats are nice, Republicans are mean, liberals care about poor people, conservatives care about money, Democrats are for peace, Republicans are for war. Now, these are all silly factory setting ideas that once you dig a little deeper, you find are not true. And then I had a series of events about 5 years ago that caused my wake up. And I would say I have no problem being called a conservative at this point, just to be very clear. What really is so beautiful about the conservative movement right now is it is an extremely wide tent. What's happening on the left is basically it's you're woke or you're out, meaning if you don't select these 10 things that the woke people want and you have to do it the second they want you to do it, then you're out. Well, what that does is it creates incredible opportunity for people on the right to say, hey, we've got some sort of traditional conservative religious Republicans, let's say. We've got more libertarian-minded people. We've got hardcore MAGA people. We have more, either neocons or more generic Republicans. That's a pretty wide swath of people. And I would say I fall a little more on the libertarian side of that. And that's a great place to have interesting debates. And what I find is when I go to, you just mentioned Charlie Kirk, when I go to Turning Point events, I talk about some things that I know that the average conservative may not agree with. And guess what? They say, hey, we're happy you're here and let's keep discussing it. Usually what they say with a smile on their face is, hey, we'll get you eventually. But they're down to have the debate where there really is no debate on the other side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Karasik, co-founder of the Jewish Republican Alliance and JRA Nation. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have Dave Rubin here with us today. We'll be speaking with Dave in just a few minutes. But first, in October of 2018, we all remember the shootings that took place at the Pittsburgh synagogue, where 11 Jews were killed and where 7 were injured by a person whose sole purpose it was to kill Jews. A few days later, the Jewish Republican Alliance held an interfaith vigil with Pastor Rob McCoy and Rabbi Michael Barkley at the Godspeak Calvary Church. On that day, Mitch and I spoke to a packed church filled with both Christians and Jews, uniting and joining together to confront anti-Semitism. Our wives, Judy and Stephanie, gave a touching video presentation to honor those who were killed. I warned then that anti-Semitism is continuing to grow in Europe and on college campuses and in America, and good people must come together to destroy it. But during that great tragedy, we were comforted to know that President Trump, Vice President Pence, and the UN Ambassador Nikki Haley unequivocally supported Israel and the Jewish people. Vice President Pence had repeatedly stated that we stand with Israel and the Jewish people. Nikki Haley told the world that the days of the UN bullying Israel were over. And President Trump said that this evil anti-Semitic attack is an assault on all of us. It is an assault on humanity. It must be confronted and condemned everywhere it rears its ugly head. We must stand, he said, with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism and vanquish the forces of hate. To those seeking their destruction, we will seek their destruction, he said. Now that is moral clarity. But today is Friday, May 21st, 2021, and it is a different time and a different day. But once again, Jews are under attack. Jews are under attack in Israel. There were attack in the United States. Thousands of rockets are raining over Israel. And now, supported by BLM and others on the left, Jews are being attacked in the streets, and Jewish businesses and synagogues are being vandalized. President Biden, his administration, and the left are largely to blame for this horrible turn of events because of their complete lack of moral clarity. Republicans overwhelmingly support Israel, but where are the true old-fashioned liberals who are afraid to go against their party that has been taken over by the left? Biden recently gave hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinians without any preconditions for them to recognize Israel's right to exist and live in peace. Biden sent signals to Iran that he wanted back into the Iranian nuclear deal, despite the fact that 78% of Israelis were against it. Biden offered no consequences to the Iranians for funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to Hamas and providing them rockets to attack Israel. The Biden administration has turned its back on the Abraham Accords and has not supported those countries who chose to make peace with Israel. And Biden showed a further lack of support by deliberately delaying an appointment of an ambassador to Israel. In just a few months, President Biden's policies and his lack of moral clarity have compromised safety of Jews in Israel and now in America. Biden then wrongly, in my opinion, decided to pressure Israel into a ceasefire as they work to destroy rockets by Hamas. Throughout our great history, there have always been great leaders who have arisen. Most recently, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu working together to defeat Islamic terrorism, the Islamic Caliphate, crippling Iran, and to create peace and prosperity for America and Israel. If America is truly to be great again, true leadership and moral clarity will be required. The JRA truly misses President Trump, his amazing leadership, his moral clarity, and his support for Jews and Israel. And now Jews and Christians and all good people in the world must stand up to the attacks on Israel and Jews everywhere, not to be afraid to speak out. I pray that God will continue to bless Israel, the Jewish people, and America. And let us all work together to eliminate anti-Semitism from the face of the earth. I thank you all for being here. And now I'd like to introduce fellow co-founder, Mitch Silberman. Mitch?
Hello, JRA community. It is always so great when we are together. Like you, I am horrified by what's going on in Israel these past 10, 11 days. Equally horrified how the media is portraying Israel as the bad guy, the aggressor. I guess Israel is the only country in the world that's not allowed to defend itself. I'll tell you what else is troubling. Like you, I have good people in my life that voted for this administration. Now, I'm not talking about the hard lefties. We always say, don't bother with them. They're pretty much far gone. But the good, decent people that are moderates, center left, even liberal, that voted for this administration, all of a sudden now they're posting, I stand with Israel. Or they forward an email that says, sign this petition to show your support for Israel. I'm sorry, that's chutzpah. You know how I show my support for Israel? I voted twice for the most pro-Israel president in US history. You know how I show my support for Israel? Along with Bruce, I co-founded the Jewish Republican Alliance. You know how I show my support for Israel? I vote for the party that constantly stands with and behind Israel, no matter what. So to send me information that they need to be supporting Israel, they are, or I should be, I think that's a lot of temerity. You know, I've heard that with addicts, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you can get better. And this addiction to voting Democrat has got to stop. So maybe at some point, the cognitive dissonance will make their heads explode when they say, Orange man bad, but he's great for Israel. I voted for Biden, but he's bad for Israel. At some point, this has got to stop because the left is leading and destroying the Democratic Party and trying to take America along with it. But I'll tell you what, ironically, the right is what's going to strengthen and save the Republican Party. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that I came upon a few days ago. You'll never guess who said it. I sure didn't. This is America. We can do anything here. You know who said that? A famous Democrat and a famous liberal named Ted Turner. Ted Turner, who would not be welcomed by the elitists in the Democratic Party that hate America and blame Israel, but he would find a home as a classical liberal in today's Republican Party where we love America and support Israel. And now I have a great honor of introducing our guest today. We're very excited to have him. I'm sure you know him. Dave Rubin's journey from a left-leaning progressive to a free-thinking classical liberal has been quite an adventure. He now feels that the modern left has lost its way, you'd think, by taking political correctness and groupthink to a dangerous level, distracting from the true American dream of the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Dave's background as a stand-up comedian, degree in political science, and willingness to listen without fighting has uniquely positioned him to tackle big ideas and uncomfortable truths with thought leaders from both sides of the aisle. Dave is the creator and host of the Rubin Report and author of Don't Burn This Book. Dave, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys. And let me just say before we do anything else that we set this up, I don't know, about 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago or so, obviously not knowing that, this fortunately temporary war was going to break out in the Middle East, and that the horrific events that are unfolding right now as we speak in New York City and here in Los Angeles, where I am, and close to where a few of you guys are. So I'm thrilled to be with you today and to unpack all of this, because in many ways, the stuff that I've been talking about for these last few years and writing about, and the issues that you guys both brought up in your remarks there are exactly what has now come to pass. And here we are, and we are at a pivotal moment. I mean that as an American, I mean that as a Jew, I mean that as a decent citizen of the world, and as a freedom-loving person. It's like we now have to make a choice. Are we going to just fold and give up, or are we going to fight? I suspect you guys know what I'm going to do, and I think I know what you're going to do, but I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Well, welcome, Dave. We're so happy to have you here. My first question, obviously the issue of the day, it's what is going on in Israel and how it's also affecting Americans right here, American Jews being attacked right here. In my opinion, there's no moral equivalent between the Jews and the Palestinians. One side goes out of its way, and I mean the Israelis, to minimize civilian casualties, and the other indiscriminately just sends rockets to kill whoever they can. But it seems that the loud voices are always on the side of either the left, and now BLM supporting the Palestinians. How can we win the war of ideas? That is the main concern I have when we see it on the college campuses and all over America, the left speaking out against the truth, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, as you guys know, I toured with Jordan Peterson, who I think is the greatest public intellectual that we've had in the West in the last, say 5 or 10 years. And one of the things that Jordan would try to do all the time was give the devil his due. And I think in a way we have to give the left, in this case, the devil his due. They did something. They did the long march through the institutions. They brainwashed a generation. They took over the media elite. They took over all of our institutions. They did all the stuff. And I don't know exactly what we were all doing at the time. Some of us were defending this stuff years ago and warning about this stuff years ago. A lot of people think of me as the why I left the left guy, but I always give credit to David Horowitz, who I'm sure you guys know, who in many ways was the original why I left the left guy, although Ronald Reagan.
Guest. That's
fantastic. That's fantastic. And David Horowitz, who grew up as a Marxist and a communist, and then saw Ronald Reagan and said, no, that's the path I want to go down. So I love giving credit to people before me. And by the way, Ronald Reagan himself was once a Democrat and also made that transition. But I would say first we have to give them credit, not because anything that they have brought here is good or is just or is right or is in line with American values, but give them credit for doing something very evil. The way if you watch the Alien movie, there's the doctor in the first movie who's actually admiring the alien because it's so brilliant in its evil and its desire to destroy everything. So I think we have to acknowledge that first, that we're fighting something that's very elegant. It's very elegant. And I would also say at a time of COVID, although we seem to be wrapping that up now because I think it served its political purpose, we were also told, well, in essence, there's a mind virus. And what is a virus? So COVID is a virus, and it was very easy to catch and hard to get rid of. Well, that's what leftism is. It's very easy to catch this bad set of ideas and identity politics and all of these things. And then it's very difficult to get rid of those ideas, because once you've labeled everybody racist and a bigot, well, you know that if you wake up, you know what they're going to do to you, and that ain't so much fun. So to answer the question directly, what do we do in terms of the battle of ideas? Well, first off, it is we must speak up. And this I would actually squarely put at the foot of the Jews more than anyone else, because, you know, there's the old joke, if you have 3 Jews at a table, you have 4 opinions. Jews are not known to hide their opinions. And that is a wonderful thing. You know, there's a great tradition, obviously, of rabbis debating all of the issues in the Talmud and all of those things. And so many of our comedians, our great comedians in America, have been Jewish. The people that have sort of brought culture and wit and the ability to debate ideas have been Jews. And so much, by the way, of the intellectual elite have been Jews. That being said, there was a weakness in it too. And the weakness was that liberals generally are extremely tolerant and pride themselves on tolerance. And through that tolerance, this terrible strain of wokeism has come in, and it has, in essence, destroyed the good liberal. There are no good liberals left. I'm not saying that there are a few people out there that are sort of JFK liberals, but JFK would be a conservative today. Anti-war, wanted to cut taxes, didn't believe the government should do everything. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's completely the reverse of Bernie Sanders. So we have to start speaking up. I mean, I know it's almost a cliche answer, but I think doing things like this, everything that anyone can do in their local community to wake people up, and I would say specifically to the good liberals who are now sending emails saying, oh, you know, I voted for Biden because Orange man bad, but I do stand with Israel. Well, okay, it's time for a mea culpa. You really got to say right now, hey, I got it wrong. But not even because of what's happening in Israel. Even if Israel was the most evil country on the face of the earth, which obviously it is not, in many ways it is a light unto the nations. Even if that was true, we cannot have violent sectarian violence be excused in the United States. So the left is now excusing it. You're not going to really see the videos of New York City right now. They're going to the Diamond District where they know the Hasidic Jews are. Why are they going there? They're not going there because they're finding Israelis there. Actually, most of them aren't Israeli. They're American Jews. These are the same people who would tell you that Zionism is the worst thing in the history of the world. We cannot allow sectarian violence to come here, but maybe the ship has sailed. We may just be entering a sort of, I hate the phrase new normal, but a sort of new world where all the things that all of our ancestors came, not just if you're Jewish, if you're literally from anywhere, that the Irish people came to escape of famine, and what Italian people came to escape in fascism, or what German people came to escape in Nazism, or anything else, what all of our ancestors came to America to escape, we're now importing it. It's here and we're importing it. So we have work to do. There is no easy answer to that question.
You know, Dave, it's so exciting. We can listen to you for hours and days. Like you, I was a Democrat, and like many of our audience, was there a pivotal moment when you woke up and you said, hey, I don't belong here anymore? Because the reason is we're always looking for how we can arm our audience with what worked for Dave. Maybe it'll work for their friends, their family. Was there this pivotal moment for you?
Yeah, well, first I should give you a little backdrop, which is that my family is basically, I would say, a liberal New York Jewish family. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in Long Island. I lived in Manhattan most of my life. I grew up in a liberal Jewish community, which, by the way, when I say liberal in that sense, especially in those years, I was born in 76, so my formative years are the 80s and 90s. When a society is going well, liberalism kind of works. When the wheels are on correctly, liberals with their sort of, where else can we expand freedom and equality? That's a beautiful thing. And I think liberals have done a good job of that. That's why, by the way, so many Jewish people were the white people who were locked arm in arm with Martin Luther King Jr. as he was fighting for equality, not for equity, which is a very different thing that we can get into later if you want. So I would say growing up in that atmosphere, I'm sure it's similar to many of your families, whatever holiday it was, we'd have a massive table and, the kids' table. And I was always fighting to get to the adults' table because I was the oldest of my generation. And I always thought what the adults were doing was interesting. And they'd be arguing over politics and the president and Israel and abortion and the whole damn thing. And then when dessert was served, everybody stopped. Nobody walked out of that house angry at each other. That's the way it used to be. That is the spirit of true liberalism. But I would say if you believe in any of that at this point, you are a conservative. But I think the real problem with that, and I think Jews have a particular strain of this, and I would point this at myself too, and I'm really trying to work through this personally, is that Jews sort of traded in everything after the Holocaust for assimilation for many, many good reasons. Many good reasons. I mean, we have a brutal history. It ain't pretty. And by many estimations, we shouldn't even be here at this point. But something kept us here. Something kept us here. But then it sort of got traded in for like what I would say is like the Seinfeldization of America, that it wasn't really that you believed in. And by the way, I love Seinfeld. I think it's the greatest sitcom ever written. And I'm rewatching Curb Your Enthusiasm right now. But that sort of thing, that sort of, oh, it's just this cultural thing that has something to do with a sense of humor, but really doesn't have anything to do with belief per se or tradition, really. It's just this, I eat bagels, I kind of something, I know something about the Upper West Side of Manhattan or something like that. It doesn't work. And I think a lot of liberal Jews are finally hitting that position. And I suspect you guys are probably going to find that your group is going to grow and grow and grow right now, because people are going to realize, hey, maybe I did make some mistakes along the way. And real quick, to specifically answer your question, which was about what was my wake up? You know, there were a couple moments that happened to me specifically. But you know, I used to work at the Young Turks, which was a far left progressive network. And one of the moments that I write about in the book is that I was on air and they were covering a clip on Fox News where a guy by the name of David Webb, who you guys may know, he's a Sirius XM host and he subs in for Hannity sometimes. He's a conservative who happens to be Black. And I was sitting there watching the clip with my co-hosts, my progressive, tolerant, lefty co-hosts, and they were looking at this conservative Black man and saying the worst things you could possibly say about him. He's an Uncle Tom, he's a sellout, you know, all of this stuff. What they didn't know is that I know David Webb. He was a good friend of mine because we worked at Sirius XM together. I know he believes what he says. I know he's fighting for values that he cares about and he loves America and all those things. And when I was sitting there, I'm looking around at these so-called tolerant people saying, oh, that Black man's the worst thing because he doesn't behave the way we want Black people to behave. And we do this in the name of tolerance. And it suddenly hit me. You guys are the bigots. You prejudge him. And that's what prejudice is. I don't care what your skin color is, but they do. They only like Black people who think the same way they think. I don't care. Black people, guess what? Jews are entitled to opinions. Black people are entitled to opinions. And you might have the wrong opinions by my estimation, but you're entitled to them. And that was one of many moments that kind of woke me up to this whole thing.
Well, we're glad you're on the right side and happy to have you here. You know, in line with what Mitch talked about, I mean, we're all having similar situations when we talk to people we once respected and confront them with the ideas that we're talking about today. We oftentimes get very hostile remarks, including profanity and being accused of being a racist or being in bed with racists. You know, it's very interesting when I see the total almost liberal, and they call it liberal fascism, where they want illegal aliens to vote. They want ballot harvesting, no signature verification, packing the Supreme Court, adding, you know, more states so they can control Congress, you know, masks forever, no challenges to the election. How do we, you know, one of the things that's really important to me is to have free and fair elections. And there's a battle now that we have to win between the HR1 and S1 and some of the bills that have been passed. You know, how do we win that battle? Because that's, I think, probably the most important battle in America.
You know, on the election side of this, look, the same people who don't want you to have an ID to vote, when suddenly Gavin Newsom was getting recalled here in California, where I know a few of you guys are here in California with me for God knows what reason, I have no idea, but suddenly the Democrats were really into signature verification. Isn't that bizarre? In the election that went the way they wanted it to go, they didn't care. Even here in Los Angeles, when I voted, I didn't know, I wasn't fully aware that you didn't have to at least show your ID just to prove you were who you were. So when I went to the ballot here in Los Angeles, I took out my ID because I was going to hand it to the woman. I said, my name's Dave Rubin, blah, blah. I was going to hand it to her. She said, no, we don't need to see that. We just need to know your address. Well, that means that quite literally, I early voted. I could have walked in the next day and just, I know my neighbor's name. I could have walked in and said, hey, yeah, I'm Bob. I'm Bob on blah, blah, blah street. And I could have voted as him. So when they say all these things, that if you want signature verification or you want ID to vote, that you're racist, is psychotic. But what they have done so well, and again, this gets to the elegance of the parasite, they have made us afraid. The cries of racism, nobody wants to be called a racist. Nobody wants that scarlet letter. Nobody wants to be told you're a bigot and a homophobe and whatever other awful thing. It's like the worst thing you could be called in a modern sense. And they have used it. And the irony is, in reality, it's them. It's them. As a kind of new guy, let's say, to the right, when I went to Trump rallies here in Beverly Hills, well, first off, there were plenty of Israeli flags there too, and nobody was attacking the Jews then. As a matter of fact, they were very happy that they were there. But I met a group of truly diverse, not in the stuff that in the stuff that I don't care about, meaning, yeah, there were Black people and Latino people and gay people and straight people. I don't care about any of that stuff. But it was politically diverse there. Many of the people at the Trump rallies here in Los Angeles were Democrats. They were Democrats who were mugged by reality, who wanted to go to work. These were people who were apolitical, who suddenly realized that Trump was the guy guarding the door. So we just must stop playing by their rules. Stop being afraid because they called you racist that they're somehow morally right. They're not. And in most cases, they are the racist. And I would also say, I get asked this question a lot that you're asking when I do college events, because it's particularly hard for young people, because it's one thing to be called a mean thing when you're an adult, but when you're in your formative years and you're trying to figure out who you are and what you believe, to be called the worst things in the world, that's tough, right? That's really tough. We all know that. But what I always tell them, the college students, is just be a little bit better than they are. And actually, that isn't that hard to do. They're pretty terrible. And I think over time, if we live up to our ideals of live and let live, if we live up to our ideals of I want to live in a pluralistic society with people I agree with and disagree with, then that'll be just fine. And the problem there, it's not a perfect answer, because if you were to say whatever your belief is on any particular issue, they've whittled everything down to you're a bigot. And that's very hard to get out of. But I think over time, if you say, actually, I'm not, let's say I'm not for affirmative action. That's one, let's just say. Well, what they'll say to you is, oh, that means you don't want to help poor people. And if you don't want to help poor people, you don't want to help Black people. And that means you're a racist. Well, you could explain to them, well, actually, there are many studies, and I would love to point you in some directions of maybe some of the work that Thomas Sowell has done for decades, that actually, first off, there are more poor people than poor Black people, but put that aside, that actually affirmative action has harmed Black people and kept them in a cycle of poverty. And I don't want to see that. And if affirmative action worked, then why are there generations that can't get out of this? And if you subsidize certain people, then over time they stop working hard. That's not because anyone's racist. It's because it's human nature to do so. If you say to someone, oh, you can live in an apartment that's of $3,000 market value, but because of the color of your skin, you can get it for $400, and we're going to give you food stamps, do you think that person is going to go bust their ass? That has nothing to do with race. That's human nature, man. We'll take what they give us. So if you can try to know enough, you don't have to know everything, but if you try to know enough and be calm in the fights, and it's not fun, but over time, I think that is how we will win.
Dave, I was at those Trump rallies in Beverly Hills. I saw all the signs you talked about: gays for Trump, LGBTQ for Trump, Filipinos for Trump, Blacks for Trump, Jews for Trump. That's unity. That was incredible unity.
And the idea that anyone there was a bigot, I mean, that was the part that really kind of blew my mind, because I'd never said that I was supporting Trump till September of 2020. That was when I officially said I was doing it. Obviously, I had been thinking about it, for at least 6 months before, if not longer than that. But to go to one of those rallies and meet the people, and meet happy people also. Liberals are miserable. Liberals are absolutely miserable, joyless, controlling, authoritarian lunatics, by and large. Not every single one. And my mom is still a good liberal, so okay. But to see these happy people, and to see, wait a minute, these are the Nazis and the homophobes, and now I've got Black people hugging gay people with the white guy, and then it just blows the illusion right there. It just blows it once you see it.
Yeah.
You're so right. To move to another subject that is going to probably be becoming more important than it was even before. But I used to think Jimmy Carter was the worst president in my lifetime. I think Biden in a few months has probably hit all the low marks that you could probably hit. But he has created a border problem where there wasn't as big a border problem under President Trump. And now with all this going on in the world, there's not only risks for people coming in here with disease or people taking jobs away from Americans, but you also have the ability for terrorists to come in here, and you have a whole humanitarian crisis of people on the border that thought that they were welcome, and they're not sure where they belong at this point. But I think this border crisis is huge. What do you think?
Yeah, well, first off, I'll give credit where credit's due. I mean, you know, if I don't think Biden's in charge, so it's whoever's in charge, not Biden. I mean, Biden is obviously, I mean, I don't mean this with any pleasure. My grandma had dementia, and I spent a lot of time with her at the end, taking her to geriatric doctors and all that sort of stuff. And I know what it does to you. There's something not right with Biden. So I don't think Biden is really in charge, but I get your broader point. First, I would say every single country on earth has a right, and even more so, a duty to defend its borders as it sees fit. That doesn't mean that every measure a country takes is the right measure, sensibly, financially, whatever else. But it is, what is a country? What makes us separate from Mexico? There is a border. That's you guys, this is us. And by the way, that's Canada up there. Every country has to set their borders. And by the way, I would say the same exact thing about Israel, and I would say the same thing about Peru. I mean, every single country, that is the purpose of the nation state. The same people who are telling us that we're evil and we're racist and we're patriarchal and we're genocidal and all of these things, they also want us to have open borders. It's like, what are you talking about? What planet are you people on? You're telling us we're the worst nation ever. We're horrible and racist. And yet everyone seems to still want to come here and nobody leaves. I mean, no one's ever leaving the United States. You would think if we were that terrible, you know, Lena Dunham and Sarah Silverman, they're still here for some strange reason. As for the specifics on the border, look, we could talk all day long about whether you need a physical wall, or we now live in a time of extraordinary technology, so you could do all sorts of things in terms of surveillance and all of that. I would say, without getting into all the nitty gritty, because you want to get into some other topics, I would say we have to defend the border. I don't have a problem with a wall. First off, a wall in and of itself is not racist. Let's be very clear about that. And I would say if there are certain areas that have long swaths that you need a physical wall, that's fine. If you have other areas where you need a virtual wall and other kinds of surveillance, that's fine. But we have to have an honest discussion about any of this stuff. And the problem is we can't, because if you say anything about immigration, well, what happens? You get called a racist, and then the conversation's up. So then we can't even have an honest discussion about, well, what do you do with the, estimated, say, 12 million people who are here illegally? And by the way, the Latino community in many cases is very against giving all those people immediate citizenship, which the Democrats basically want to do, because a lot of the Latino community in America, just like the Jews and Italians and Irish and everyone else, came here legally. And in many ways, you're rewarding the people that broke the law. So, we could do 2 hours on that probably, but that's broadly what I would say.
Dave, I've been a fan of your work for quite some time, but what really opened my eyes to the importance of your thoughts and what you do is we were invited to a private screening of No Safe Spaces. And your role in that movie was very powerful. We want to talk a little bit about the crisis going on with colleges today?
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, I would say everyone sees it. No Safe Spaces, which debuted about 2 years ago. I mean, this last year and a half has been so crazy that time feels like it has no meaning anymore. But No Safe Spaces, in essence, came out about 2 years ago, and we had taped it basically the year before. So in essence, it's about 3 to 4 years old in terms of the content. And this was a movie a documentary put together by my friends Adam Carolla and Dennis Prager, who I'm sure your audience knows, about what was happening on the college campuses. And, over the last couple of years, I've gone to college events, and time again, almost without exception, there would be groups calling me a Nazi and a racist and a homophobe, and there would be people blocking doors and pulling fire alarms. Meanwhile, I'm going up there and I'm talking about freedom and how I want everyone to be treated equally, and I don't want anyone to be racist or against trans people or just any of the stuff. And yet these young people had been so brainwashed to think that anyone who maybe has some different thought that they have, that they are entitled to destroy their speech. Now, the interesting part, I think, really about the movie and what's happened is years ago when I was talking about a lot of this stuff, and I would post these videos on my YouTube channel. There's a really viral one. I did an event at University of New Hampshire where basically a mob caused them to move the event out of the school, which already is a defeat. If a university says, hey, we can't even host this here. You're going to have to do it off-site. Well, you've already acquiesced to the mob. You've already lost. So what they did was, I was supposed to speak in front of about 300 people. They said, we can't protect this on campus, so we're going to move you to the ice hockey arena, which sat about 5,000 people. So now here I am talking in front of 300 people in a 5,000 seat arena, which is, as a public speaker, this is like your worst nightmare, right? You want a nice, tight, packed room. And they bring noisemakers and they're throwing things and they're screaming and they time their mindless chants and all of this stuff. And one of the people that was there was a woman who's screaming from the back, and she keeps screaming that I hate trans people. And I said to her, not only do I not hate trans people, but I have no problem if an adult decides to live in however they want to live. I said, I hope that you are happy and living a fulfilled life. I hope that you have people that love you and all of those things. What I would be against is transitioning young people. That's a whole other topic. We can get into it if you want. But I said all of this stuff to her, basically made every point. I want you to be treated equally under the law. This is the promise of America. And of course, what did she say? I'm a transphobe and I'm a bigot and a racist. It turns out, I didn't know this till weeks later, that that woman was a professor at the University of Gender Studies. Now, there's no repercussions for her, of course, because this is the stuff they have taught everybody. So that really gets to the heart of the question about the college campuses. And I was told by many of my critics, Dave, you're focused on the college campus. Once they get out into the real world, that's what everyone said. Once they get out into the real world, then they'll figure out what's what. And you know what? The real world, folded like a wet paper bag, basically. And that's where we're at right now.
That is so true. So true. And to follow up on that, Dave, many of us, on this panel or in our audience have kids that are college-age kids or young adults that are in business, and they're surrounded by what it seems are people on the left. And sometimes there's a real hesitancy for anybody to speak their true mind in a setting where they'll pretend that they're on the left or just not say anything at all. Like, what would you say, how would you advise college kids today on how they should deal with that?
Well, first off, I'll say it from a Jewish perspective, which is that I hope that all of you watching that have children have given a little bit of an explanation of your family history to your children. I have a cousin who lives in Los Angeles. It's actually my grandma's cousin. This woman, her name is Henny. She's 96 years old and she's a genealogist. So I have a 96-year-old genealogist in my family. And she lived in Holland for many years, and she's traced my family back into the 1700s. And, I had family in Holland and Lithuania, and it's the same story that many of us come from. But knowing your family history, because I guarantee you that all of us, and probably everyone watching this, have a somewhat similar family history, which includes a lot of brutality. I grew up around Holocaust survivors. My Uncle Jerry, who married into the family, married my dad's sister. His parents were both Holocaust survivors. I knew his Uncle Joe, who still had the numbers on his arm, who literally was shot by Nazis as he broke into, the story is extraordinary. I wrote about it in the book, but after the World War II, he had given up his daughter to a Christian commune because he thought that was the only way she was going to survive. She was about 3 or 4 years old. Changed her name to Mary because he wanted her to believe that she was Christian. Didn't want I can't even remember her Jewish name off the top of my head, or her original name. But after the war, he went to the commune basically to pick her up now that he was a free man, and they didn't believe that she was his daughter. He had to break in overnight, and he was shot in the process of that and had a bullet in him for the rest of his life because I think it was too close to an organ or something, couldn't get it removed. Now, I tell you that story because we all know some stories like this. Jews came from a, as I said before, it's sort of a miracle that we're still here, but something kept us here. And I think the ideas that your children are probably being infected with are somehow that we're privileged because Jews are thought of as white. If we are privileged, it is because of hard work, and it is because of family, and it is because of a lineage that is rich with history and tradition and all of those things. And until we return to that, and believe me, this is a very odd argument for me to be making right now. This is not an argument I would have made maybe 2 years ago. But until we return to that, we are screwed because the forces of evil that are infecting your children, they are not going to stop. They are not going to stop. And it won't just be that your children will come home being anti-Israel activists, which is happening. but they will literally turn on you. They will turn on you because they will think you are part of the evil problem and capitalism and all of these evil things. So I would link it again to knowing the history. Why did your great-grandparents flee to America? Why did the Holocaust happen? Why did the visuals that we've all seen out of New York City in the last couple of days look an awful lot like Germany on Kristallnacht? What are these things? The Nazis just don't show up one day. There's a period that allows this to happen. And I think if you know a little bit of history, your own family history, maybe it inoculates you a little bit. But again, not a perfect answer.
But how would people who are already having conservative kids, how can they deal in a world surrounded by people on the left at that
Well,
age?
in that regard, I can give you an easier answer, which is if you are raising decent conservative kids, build new things. Give them I suspect you've probably done this already, but give them the tools to go out and find lives of purpose and with jobs that they care about and families they care about and all of those things. And perhaps instead of, for 20 years or 16 years, saving 100 grand so that they could get brainwashed at Princeton, perhaps, give them 10 grand to maybe travel for a year and then say, hey, here's 90 grand for your first down payment on a house. And that's a lot of money for a first down payment on a house. I think we have to stop thinking that the old world is how we have to dictate everything going forward. I don't have kids yet. We're working on it. But by the time my kids are going to college, I guarantee you they're not going to be going to college. And we're going to look back on it and go, man, why does Bernie Sanders want free college? Do you think it's because Bernie Sanders wants everyone to be educated? Do you think Bernie Sanders wants everyone to learn the true history of the Middle East and of Israel? Do you think Bernie Sanders wants anyone to learn economics from Thomas Sowell? Do you think Bernie Sanders wants anyone to learn psychology from Jordan Peterson? Of course not. But what would be the best way to brainwash an entire generation into Marxism? Send them to public schools that are quote unquote free. So I think just think creatively. So if you have young kids that are in high school now, maybe saying to them, hey, maybe you don't have to go to college. We can figure out some, there's some social stuff that's important to learn there. But we can set you up in life in a way, and you'll find a place to live that's more congruent with your beliefs. I know that's ironic. I live here in LA, at least for now, but I think that's a big piece of it too.
Dave, about 4 years ago, I was called into jury duty, and the case was the defendant was a guy that was accused of attacking a police officer, and I actually got called into the box. And I told them very passionately I could not be fair and impartial because I teach my children you don't attack police officers. That was 4 years ago. You probably all saw that video of a professor a couple of weeks ago that was stopped by a police officer, and she says, "You're a killer. You're a killer. You're a Mexican racist. You'll never be white." Nothing ever happened to her. Talk a little bit about what I call the brutality on police that we see now escalating.
Oh, it's extraordinary. It's horrific. I did see that video. It took place also, I think, in SoCal somewhere. I know it was definitely in California. And this woman it happens to be a Black woman, and she's pulled over because she was on her phone. The cop was not threatening her anyway. She's screaming at him that he's a murderer. And then, of course, she, as the leftists usually do, she exposes herself as the racist because she's suddenly screaming that he's Mexican. So they always do that. But as far as the police, look, this is where my say libertarian side and the new growing conservative side are trying to piece everything together. I don't want the state to have that much power, obviously. And by the way, I think that's for all the pogroms and inquisitions and holocausts and everything else that our ancestors have been through, it was the state that was doing it. There were sometimes roving gangs maybe in Eastern Europe, but in essence, it was the state that was promoting all of this violent stuff. We need police. Well, first off, this is going to sound very Trump, but you either live in a country or you don't. You either have law and order or you don't. So if people think that defunding the police is good, well, just look at the evidence. And we know, I covered this on the show last week. Every single progressive city, Portland, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, the list goes on and on, Minnesota, the list goes on and on of the cities that defunded the police. Every single one of them, rise in murder, rise in crime, without exception. So either you could say, yes, we can do these things and we can just go to hell in a handbasket, or we can, if you're someone that believes that policing needs to be looked at a little bit differently, or you want to have a discussion about rules of engagement, well, of course, any sensible adult can have that. And by the way, we can also have a sensible conversation about incarceration and if there are racial disparities related to this, that, or the other thing. But the problem, once again, I mean, it all sort of goes back to the left because they're the dominant cultural force. They won't let us have that conversation. You're either racist and you want to support the racist police, or you're going to do it their way. And the simple truth is we're either a nation or we're not. We either have laws or not. I, for one, I make a point whenever I'm at one of these events, or if I see a police officer, I try to go shake their hand and thank them. A lot of them happen to be fans of mine, which is great, but they need support. I mean, the idea that police officers somehow get in this to do something evil or to promote racism or to be evil people. Yes, are there bad apples? Of course. And guess what? There are bad plumbers too. There are racist plumbers. There are every group is going to have their bad apples, period. But police need our support. And I would just add one thing, which is I don't blame the police for any of this. I blame the leadership. I blame the buffoon, Eric Garcetti, my mayor in Los Angeles, who's kneeling in front of Black Lives Matter activists, praying at the altar of the very people who will destroy him one day. He's a heterosexual white man who's privileged and rich. Right, exactly. So I think that is sort of where we're at. I blame the political leadership. I do not blame the police officers.
Dave, a good friend to the JRA, a good friend, Larry Elder, has been a big supporter of the Jewish Republican Alliance. He was our first big live speaker. He introduced Candace Owens for us. He has always done everything he can to support us. There's a very famous YouTube video out there from about 5 years ago where you had Larry as a guest on Rubin Reports and had a conversation about racism. How did that affect your views, if in any way whatsoever? Yeah,
in many ways. We talked about my wake up moment before, and in the book I write about 3 of them. I gave you the one about David Webb, but the other one of the other 2 that I write about is that moment with Larry Elder. And I was on my show and I had been frustrated with the left, and I thought, well, all right, let me talk to some of these crazy conservatives. Let's see what these people are really about. And I had this conversation with Larry Elder, and in it, I said something about systemic racism. And Larry, who's been fighting this stuff for years, well, he just turned it on me. He just said, well, what do you mean? Give me the numbers. How many Black people are shot? What do you mean that there is systemic racism, meaning that there are laws in the system precluding Black people from doing anything? And I didn't have much. And I think the reason that clip went so viral, and believe me, it's been seen millions and millions of times. And at first I was not happy about it because I don't come off looking so great. And, all the YouTube videos, Larry Elder destroys libtard, Dave Rubin gets crushed by Black conservative, whatever. At first I wasn't happy about it at an ego level, but what I realized was when we finished that interview, I went into the control room, and I was at Aura TV at the time. We had several producers. Everybody said to me, Dave, let's cut that. Don't worry, we're going to cut it before we air it. And I had a moment that, you look back on life, I guess, and you figure out what your defining moments are. I said, guys, if I'm doing an interview show and I'm supposed to be doing something that is truthful and honest, we have to air that. And yeah, I guess I'm going to look pretty stupid, but we have to air it. And after the 2 days of seeing the viral stuff go crazy, I started looking in the comment section, and suddenly there were all these people saying, Rubin took it on the chin there, but he does seem like he listened. He does seem like he's going to talk to more people. He does seem like he's going to go down the path. He was respectful. And because of that then started up opening other doors for me to go on this journey. So I don't know how many people get to say that their best and worst career moment were in the exact same moment, but I can honestly say that.
Right. There's a lot of great questions from the audience, Dave. I want to talk to you about something that's frightening.
I'll try to be quicker.
No, please
get to as many as possible.
No, you're doing great.
You're doing great.
Oh, please don't keep it coming. You have something called Locals.com, and the reason this is so relevant is that social media is literally help destroying free speech. And obviously, you're taking a forward approach and saying, hey, free speech is vital, but you're doing something about it. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, partly I started Locals.com because I got sick of talking to people about talking and nobody doing anything. I mean, that really was it. It was like, boy, we all know big tech's coming for us. We know that, the Overton window of what we're allowed to say publicly keeps getting smaller and smaller. At a time when we have all the tools, we should be able to say more and more. And yet we're talking less and less. On top of the fact that social media, which is supposed to make us social, we now realize 20 years later has made us more antisocial, more angry, more anxiety ridden, and all of these things. And I thought, well, what is it that I could help build that might be some of the answers. And about 2.5 years ago, I sat down with my brother-in-law, who happens to be Israeli and a tech guy, which many of them are, obviously, a startup guy. And I said, well, what can we do? What can we do to build a community for me that would be less reliant on big tech? And we decided, okay, well, first we're going to build a subscription model so that I can have monthly subscriptions for people that want to support me. And that means I can get off patreon.com, which is a big subscription website. So that was one way of getting off big tech. Then we thought, well, okay, I'm on YouTube, but I need to be able to host my videos and own all the stuff instead of putting it on YouTube. So we built out a great video player and content management system. Same thing for audio. Then we thought, I also need to own my user data and have a news feed in my community where that's not manipulated by an algorithm, that respects free speech and all of those things. So we have a slick news feed. You can comment, you can like. We have live chat. We're working on live video streaming. It'll debut next week, actually. And we've built really, really fantastic tech. And what we did that I think really was great, actually, was that we started with me. So I was the first test run for locals.com. So if anyone wants to join my community, it's rubinreport.locals.com. But now anyone that is doing anything, I mean, you guys should be on there. You have a community of people who want to come together to be able to speak freely. And you want to be able to own that user data so that you're never going to get kicked off Locals because it's subscription based. People behave better when there's a little skin in the game. You know, one of the reasons that everything is so toxic online is that it doesn't cost anything to get in. It costs our soul, but that's another issue. But it costs our data because we're the product, obviously. So we've built something by focusing on what was right for me first. We've built something that is really great. And what I'm most proud of about Locals actually is that not only do we build something great, but in the last 6 months or so, suddenly the tech people, the money people in the tech world that are mostly libertarian, but they got sort of brainwashed by the woke thing. Suddenly they're realizing, oh, you know, there's a real business opportunity here because half the country feels like they're being stifled. And we've got a great team of not only investors, but I would say true innovators. And we're building something really, really wonderful. I think, I actually think that will have far more to do with my lasting legacy than anything that I did on the talk show.
Well, we're very excited to find out more about it, as we talked about before we went on. And I think it could be a great venue for us. That ties into a problem that we're facing in America. Most of the way people communicate now is through social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever they use. And most people, you know, especially the younger people, don't communicate with emails very much anymore. But there's a battle going on between what is censorship and what is truth and what should be allowed to be out there. And how do you come down on that situation?
Well, look, we're all sitting ducks if you don't do something to protect your digital life. Again, I can link that directly to Locals, obviously. But look, we could even do this in an Israel context. The woke thing that has infected all of these companies when they talk about diversity and inclusion and all of those things, it's very anti-Jew in nature because of what I talked about earlier. Jews are a minority that is a success, and they can't compute that. Well, would it be shocking to you if in a year from now, if you were to post something pro-Israel when the next war comes, which of course it will come, because Israel, in effect, wasn't allowed to win this war in a traditional sense because basically the U.S. demanded a ceasefire. Would it shock you if in a year from now there's another war and suddenly Google says, actually, you're not allowed to post pro-Israel memes anymore because they're the oppressor, or just whatever nonsense of the day there is? Well, that wouldn't shock anybody. I'm fairly certain that wouldn't shock anybody. Or would it shock you if Google was suppressing videos when Jewish people were attacked on the streets, because that doesn't really fit the narrative anymore because Jews are, again, supposed to be the oppressor. So we've got to figure out ways. You need off-ramps for these things. So Locals is one version of that. You know, there's plenty of other companies, and I think I love competition. I mean, I love capitalism. I love freedom. I believe in human ingenuity and the human mind. So we've got to figure it out. But, you know, would it shock you if even tomorrow, if just tomorrow YouTube announced, you know what, we're no longer taking creator content. We're only going to work with big networks. And by the way, everybody, you've got 24 hours to get all your stuff, and then we're deleting it. Like, that wouldn't shock me. Nothing would shock me at this point. So we've given a tremendous amount of ourselves to these companies that don't care about us. And I don't mean that even in a purely sort of nefarious sense. They don't care about their companies. They want money. They want data. They want power. That's sort of the nature of the beast. But that doesn't mean you have to play the entire time. And at least not protect yourself. I mean, that's what you should be doing, if nothing else.
Terrific. Before we go, love to hear your thoughts on 2022 and who you think might run for president in 2024 on our side, the right side, the good side.
Yeah, well, look, I will support Ron DeSantis. Absolutely, unquestionably. I hope that he will run. What I really, let me say on the Trump side first, a lot of people obviously still want Trump to win. They feel, or to run again, they feel that he's sort of the energy thing. He's the thing that would rally everybody. What I think might be a better situation if for the future of America, and certainly for Republicans, is maybe you get DeSantis in there. DeSantis, I think, is only 42 years old, former member of the military, did an incredible job in COVID, believes in the right values that we're all talking about here. But if he could run at the top of the ticket and Trump could do the thing that I think would be the hardest for Trump, which is maybe put aside the ego a little bit and say, hey, I will lead the charge from the outside. I'll do the rallies. I'll get the people going. I'll fight the media. I will do all of that stuff so that DeSantis could be more statesmanlike, could be more appealing to a wider swath of people, all the disaffected liberals we talked about before, who had Trump derangement syndrome, that just couldn't do it. They couldn't do it no matter what. He's orange, his hair is crazy, he eats ketchup with his steak, all of that stuff. Well, DeSantis, they probably could vote for, even if maybe they disagree with him on some policy. So if Trump could just say, hey, I will be the train, and you will then do the work of being a statesman-like leader. And then let's say you had a DeSantis, I don't know, maybe Nikki Haley ticket, or you had a DeSantis Candace Owens ticket, or you had a DeSantis Dan Crenshaw ticket. I mean, we could figure out exactly what that looks like. Maybe a DeSantis Tulsi Gabbard ticket. I mean, I think she's waking up real fast. Whatever that might be, that seems really interesting to me. And as far as 2022, I would say I genuinely pray at this point that the Republicans take the House back. This thing is not going to end anytime soon. The Democrats are completely out of control. And unless you want more chaos on our streets, on more lawlessness, unless you want every norm to be changed, whether that's the Electoral College or whether that's the Supreme Court seats or whether DC is a state or just everything that we discussed earlier, then we must fight back against it. So I hope that the Republicans just continue to fight and find some new fighters too.
Well, we're in for the fight. We're happy to be fighting alongside of you. And Dave, we're so thankful and grateful for you joining us here today.
It was my pleasure, guys, and keep up the good work. And especially for those of you that are in California, it's like, can we fix this place? We'll see. But if not, I guess I'll meet you guys at Jerry's Deli or something.
Thank you, Dave. And to all of you, thank you again for joining us. Now more than ever, as Dave said, we've got to speak out, and the Jewish Republican Alliance is going to continue to speak out. We are not afraid to speak out. We are going to continue to do that and be your voice. If you want to stay informed, get involved, and make a difference, there's so many ways you can do that. Go to our website, make a donation, become a member, join our alliance, invite a friend. We need you now more than ever. Thank you all for joining us. We wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Take care.